Welcome to another episode of Women and Resistance. I am your host, Adesoji Iginla, and with me, as usual, is the brilliant and informative Fubara Eneli Esquire. How are you, sis?
Doing great. Good evening. How are you?
Yeah, good evening, good evening. So, yes, we've done this is probably the third time we're doing this sort of review because um, it's a way to sort of recalibrate and go over what we might have missed, also tie it into the relevant times that we're currently experiencing. And by that, I'm referring to the women we've reviewed so far on Women and Resistance. And so tonight, I'll just give you a feeling of what we'll intend to do. We're going to look at the roles of this 11 women, looking back in history, and then sort of juxtaposing their positions they held at that time with contemporary times. So,
Oh, okay.
um, yes, let's start with the epicenter of imperialism at the moment, which is New
Ooh,
York, where we
okay.
have three of the past people we've reviewed on here having some sort of connection to said place. By that, Julia de Burgos, Assata Shakur, and Shirley Chisholm. Take it
Yes.
anywhere you want to go to.
Well, as the new mayor-elect of New York City, Zohran Mamdani, said yesterday in his um, remarks after he won the election, New York City is a city of immigrants, built
Mm,
by immigrants, and he says, and now led by an immigrant. Interestingly enough, November 5th, I believe,
yeah,
of 1968
68
was the year that Shirley Chisholm was
became
elected as the first African American woman
correct.
to Congress from
Mm,
New York City. And of course, we know that she was born here in the United States, but her parents are from the area that we will call the Caribbean.
mm,
And we know that Julia de Burgos was born in Puerto Rico. Some people may not realize Puerto Ricans are US citizens. We're seeing that play out now with the controversy about Bad Bunny being chosen as the entertainment for the NFL, what is it,
Super
Super
Bowl.
Bowl?
Yeah.
And people saying, it should be an American. And it's like, duh. It's Puerto Rico is essentially one of your colonies, one of America's colonies, and they
Mm,
are American citizens. And she migrated here. And you will see that with both of those stories, their families came here as a result of economic difficulties, or Julia came here as a result of economic difficulties in their own homeland. Many of those difficulties can be traced to some of the policies, the imperialist policies of the United States of America. So, on the one hand, you're like, hey, we don't want any immigrants. Although, of course, if you're not indigenous to America, you are an immigrant yourself.
correct.
So we know who they're referring to. But at the same time, you are actually destabilizing livelihoods of people across the world. And at the same time, touting the United States of America as the land of milk and honey, great
Mm,
opportunity. You can come and live the American dream. And then you wonder why people may show up on these shores. And then, of
mm,
course, in the case of Assata Shakur, she had lived in the South, but also spent significant amount of time in New York City and went to school in New York. And that was the the scene for a lot of her woes, so to speak. And so as we study these women, I really appreciate the fact that you want this conversation to also allow us not to just freeze them in a place
Time.
and
Yep.
time, but to look at how the issues that they were addressing back then are still with us today,
Correct.
and how their wisdom and the ways that they resisted back then
Mm,
could inform us on how we can resist today.
mm, mm.
Yeah.
Okay.
What's your take on it?
Okay. So he mentioned something. A part of his driving campaign was the affordability of living in New York,
Mm-hmm.
and which probably pivots into the next angle that we probably would like to look at this is it's the epicenter of capitalism.
It is.
So, yes, it is. And so I would like to say, with the roles of those three brilliant women, it's it further highlights the problem that although we're talking about years ago where they passed through, existed in said space, in the case of Julia Burgos, she actually embodies the kind of problem the mayor of New York is seeking to address. She died a pauper.
She did, buried in an unmarked grave.
On my grave.
Fortunately, at least she could get to a hospital that it would appear rendered some medical aid to her, although that did not save her life. We definitely see with Shirley Chisholm that she spent 7 years of
Mm,
her childhood away from her parents
mhm,
because her parents could not make a living decent enough to take care of themselves and their children and to set up their families in the way that they wanted to. And so they sent their children
mm.
back to live with Shirley Chisholm's grandmother for
Grandparents.
7 years. So, any of you who've had children, or even
Mm,
if you haven't had children, just the notion of at that very young age being sent away from your parents to live, yes, with a family member nonetheless, but still not your parents. She did appreciate all that she learned and
mm,
what that experience lent to her life. But they did that so that they were able to really focus on working and saving so
mhm.
that they could give their children the American dream, which was to get them educated and to buy a home. And the
And so,
question is
which brings
today,
us
can
round.
you, yeah, can you even still do that today? If
Yes.
you, yes, is that possible in New York City
Hmm.
and increasingly across the United States of America, especially when you think of the fact that the minimum wage in this country has not been raised since 2009. And yet, of course, we know inflation has been rising. People are supposed to be able to survive on $7.25 an hour, which in many major cities in the United States, if you work 40 hours a week and that's what you're making after taxes, there is absolutely no way that you are not going to be unhoused or at least very vulnerable.
Okay. So, I mean, the idea of being vulnerable, even though you are putting in the hours and still can make ends meet, was one of the reasons why Shirley Chisholm, in not being able to afford going to that school, when she
Yes,
got into Congress, what was it she
yes.
did?
So one of the major programs, policies that she passed was to create a program called SEEK. And when I worked at the College of Staten Island in New York, I actually lived in Bedford-Stuyvesant in New York. I lived in Manhattan and Harlem for a while when I was volunteering with John Henry Clark, and I lived um, I lived with his girlfriend, who later became his wife, sleeping on the floor in her living room, and then slept on the couch of a friend of mine.
Wow. Slummy.
Before, yes, exactly, before eating one meal a day, before I started working at the College of Staten Island and got a place in Bedford Stuyvesant. And it was
Mm,
a brownstone, which would have been a one family dwelling, but they had split it up where there were probably at least 8 families
mm.
that lived there, and we shared bathrooms. So I had an efficiency, but I shared a bathroom with other people, um, and was still paying more at that time. This was back in the late 90s than I would have in,
If you
say,
had lived
Michigan, where
outside
I
of New York.
eventually moved to. Yes.
Mm,
So these issues are problematic. And in fact, I met my husband while I was in New York. And when we made that decision to get married, we immediately knew that there was no way that we were going to live in New York and raise a family, because that would
mm,
have just been cost prohibitive, at least in terms of the comforts that we would want to be able to provide for our children. And so these are systemic issues, and we act as though they're issues that cannot be addressed, but it's really having the willpower to address them, because they're, to the extent that we keep minting millionaires and billionaires, and some now racing to be the first trillionaire, there's certainly enough resources for people to live a decent life if we have the willpower to set policies to make that happen. So with Shirley Chisholm, the SEEK program, which was throughout the CUNY system, the City University New York system,
mhm.
was designed to assist students from low income families, economically disadvantaged families, to be able to, one, get the remedial assistance they may need for their college credits, but also get the financial assistance, things like childcare, of course, tuition. And once that was in place in the CUNY system, other systems within the state of New York began to emulate that system as well, to create opportunities for people. And really, it is about resisting in a way that you create opportunities for yourself and for
Yep.
others. And that's what we see every single one of these women did. And even though she didn't, as far as I can recall, per se live in New York, we know that Ellen Johnson Sirleaf did a lot of work with the
Work with
United
the
Nations
UN.
and the
Yep.
IMF, that is headquartered in
In
New
DC.
York. Yes.
Yeah. So again, still going with the theme of capitalism, what would you say someone like Mary Ellen Pleasant, who obviously with means on the other side of the United States, the west side, which in California also had a voting proposition, which is the P50, in order to safeguard democracy, as it were. What would you say she would have made of the fact that now you've elected a socialist in a capitalist space, and she is a capitalist,
Well,
although
he
she used
calls himself a democratic
democratic
socialist.
socialist, yes.
Yes.
So she did use some of her means in order to help fund the Underground Railroad. And
Yes.
juxtapose that against the position that most of these millionaires or billionaires held against the democratic socialist in New York. What would you think her point of resistance would have been in today's times?
I think both her and Biddy Mason would have had something to say to that. And you see that
Mm-hmm.
from how they lived. Biddy
Yeah.
Mason made a lot of money, and she pretty much gave away most of her money. She helped build schools, helped fund churches. She helped fund an orphanage. She provided credit at stores where people who were less fortunate could go there and just say, hey, it's on her credit, and be able to purchase basic items. She provided free food. She helped provide lodging for people who were ostensibly, fleeing slavery and trying to figure out how to rebuild their lives. And of course, Mary Ellen Pleasant did the same thing. And I think what Mary Ellen Pleasant would say today is that she used capitalism strategically, that she saw wealth as a lever for liberation.
Okay.
That it's a tool that can be used and directed towards freeing other people. I think both Mary Ellen Pleasant and Biddy Mason certainly lived their lives that way. That the idea was not to just accumulate wealth and what else is fancy out there that I can buy, who can get the fanciest yacht, or who can get to space fastest or whatever. But really, how do I use my money to free my people, to make a difference, to fight for justice in the court system? And so they had a very different sense of, yes, we live in a capitalist society, and I am engaging in activities that allow me to acquire capital, but that capital is not just to gorge myself. And I guess even though she's not directly of African descent, although every human being can trace themselves back to the first person on earth, which would be a Black woman. Mackenzie Scott seems to be, doing the same thing. It appears that she cannot give her money away fast enough. And what's so crazy about it is, as many millions as she's giving out through Amazon and the investments, I mean, it just keeps pouring in. So
back in,
33 million to Spelman, 80 million to Howard, just in the last in the last month or so. Really impressive. Even my school district here in Central Texas, unsolicited, I believe she gave 18 million or something of that nature to our school district. And so I think she has some of the DNA of Mary Ellen Pleasant and Biddy Mason in terms of using capital strategically. And not just, I mean, how many beds can you sleep in at the same time? How many cars can you ride in at the same time? So when people say, I've got a 20-car garage, well, congratulations. And now what? And when you die, you can't take any of it with you. Yeah.
Okay. So,
and of course, Biddy Mason, still had wealth when she died, although she didn't get a headstone for almost 100 years later. And we know that Mary Ellen Pleasant, through capitalism and the legal system, lost most of her wealth. So it's a good thing that she used as much of it as she chose to. She used it for good, because whatever she would have hoarded or accumulated just for herself, the white system, the capitalist system, found a way to strip her of that, and she died a pauper as well. So you can't take it with you. You might as well use it to do good in the world.
Okay, so on the question of women, being able to tell their own story.
Can I say one more thing about capitalism? Sure. Because there's some other of our mothers who want to talk about that. Shirley Chisholm, just even in trying to fund her presidential run, that was a struggle. Yes, who's going to donate, and finding herself abandoned by white women whom she had worked with, and then of course Black people not necessarily having those kind of deep pockets, but even them so many times playing it too safe. Where it's like, well, we don't think you have a chance to win, so we're going to just throw our lots in with people that we already know when they win are going to continue to screw us over, per se. Shirley Chisholm, I think, on capitalism would say that capitalism without justice redistributes suffering. And so capitalism itself, if it's possible, has to be restructured. And we almost have to break down the definition of these terms, because imagine, well, let's look at Burkina Faso. if you imagine the wealth of a nation belonging to its people, and whatever is realized from that wealth being distributed to take care of the needs of the people, is that capitalism? Is that socialism? What would we call that? But we know we have capital. We know that there is going to be trading done on some level. But I think Shirley Chisholm will definitely say that there has to be a redistribution of capital. Otherwise, we just engender a lot of suffering. I think Sylvia Wynter would say that capitalism defines human beings as an economic unit. And that makes it very problematic. Because when you reduce people to just modes of production, so you're counting them as just like, how many sheep do I have? How many, like, okay, so I raise chicken. How many chicken do I have? How many eggs will they lay on an average each month? How much how much do I spend on feeding the chicken and any other labor to take care of them? And can I recoup my investment from selling their eggs or selling the chicken if I so choose? Does it make sense? So Sylvia Wynter would say is that once you start to define human beings as an economic unit, that you're automatically in very dangerous territory, and that true liberation will require redefining humanity. So she was very much about how do we define things. And then I think that my sister Assata Shakur, one of our newest ancestors, I can see her fist raised right now, and she would say that you cannot free a people using the master's tools, of the master's chains. And that capitalism as we know it was built on our backs. That our blood has fertilized the soil. So when we talk about New York being the epicenter of commerce, if you will, look at the role the city of New York played in the slave trade, what we call slave trade, but in slavery. All of the economic houses, the insurance houses, the banks, all of that, these are entities that were built on our bodies, so to speak. So ultimately, capitalism, I think for most of these women, we can talk about how Ellen Johnson Sirleaf may have seen it, but I think ultimately it has to be that capitalism is not a destination, and that capital must always be accountable to the people. So once you start treating corporations as people, which is what the U.S. Supreme Court determined, things kind of get upside down.
Yeah. Okay. So I was going to suggest, you pivoted into it, you segued into it properly. On the question of people telling their stories, which is what we do here, highlight the stories that have been told by these women, sometimes by them, some of them. Why is it important that they tell their story as opposed to the stories being told of them? I.e., I'll give you an example. Mary Ellen Pleasant pushed back against the idea of being called a mammy.
Yes.
Assata Shakur picked up a Yoruba name. Abbey Lincoln did the same thing. What's her name? Micere Mugo would often start any of her lectures by giving people the correct way of pronouncing her name. Why is that important to all of these women?
Well, like I think you have said at some point in maybe live, maybe in one of our conversations, that until the lion starts to tell the story of the hunt, we will always hear the story from the perspective of the hunter. I think that any self-respecting individual would want to tell their own story. you would want to characterize yourself. You would want to determine what you're called and what your legacy, what your legacy is. I think Micere Mugo would say that there is medicine in our stories. Certainly for me, in studying each of these women, over the course of the last few years, first of all, starting the research for the book, and then now with this series that we're doing, I can see how it's changing me on the inside. Just hearing the stories of my mothers, understanding that there is absolutely nothing that I am facing today that they have not faced and overcome. It changes how you see your life, how you face opportunities, and how you face challenges. Earlier, last week, I think I interviewed someone that many of our listeners may know, Dr. Carr, and he said, he I guess he was trying to shade me. He said, do you remember when you were mulling over whether you should even do the Rethinking Freedom radio show? And I was absolutely concerned about taking that on. I felt like there was too much on my plate and I couldn't do it without failing at it, without failing at some of the other responsibilities that I'd already taken on. But I was reminded about some of these women and what they went through and how they made the world a better place. And I said, a radio show, it's not even asking, I'm not being exiled. I'm not, it's like compared to what, I didn't have to break out of jail. As far as I know, I used to have an FBI file. I don't think I have one anymore, but who knows? What is my big issue? And so I'm grateful that they told their stories. I'm grateful for people who've gone and unearthed some of their stories, like Mbuya Nahanda's story, because it gives me the inspiration to keep fighting. And so I think that one of the reasons it's important for us to tell our stories is for that legacy, for us to understand our genealogy and to understand how we overcome, right? So I see their storytelling as medicine for us. Medicine to soothe whatever our traumas have been, but also medicine that strengthens us for our liberation fight. Sylvia Wynter, I think, will say that storytelling determines what the world believes the human to be. So if you don't tell your own story, then someone else gets to determine who you are. So for instance, Mary Ellen Pleasant being called Mammy, and she's like, nope, there's a whole lot more to me than the box that you want to put me in, right? I think Julia de Burgos will say that her story was her reclamation. And in telling her story, in writing those poems, look at the way that has engendered a sense of pride, a sense of purpose in so many people. Abbey Lincoln, I believe, would say, voice is liberation. What's the point of having a voice if you don't use it, right?
True.
Shirley Chisholm will say, if we're not written in, we are written out. So part of what they argue now is, did Africans, contribute anything to civilization? And to the extent that we don't tell our stories, which some of us had the fortune of going to Kemet this year, some of you have gone to in other times, but wherever it is that you're finding our stories, when you see those stories, you're like, you know how you go into a bathroom or somewhere and you see where someone has carved their name or their initials, so-and-so was here.
Yeah.
So telling our stories is our way of saying we were here and this is what we did, right? And it makes it harder for people to dehumanize us, to discount us. It gives us a better sense of who we are and what we are capable of. Assata Shakur will say, if we don't tell our stories, that your oppressor certainly will.
Yeah,
And then
and she
you start
is.
having issues of imposter syndrome. I have this conversation with my children, and I'm like, first of all, that was a term coined by white women that Black women have now carried on our heads. But the idea that anybody can tell you that you do not fit in, or that you do not deserve to be in a space, you have to buy into that. And the only way you buy into that is if you don't know who you are, and if you don't know your genealogy. And how do you know who you are? The Bible would say you will know them by their fruit. Like you see a tree. I can look at a mango tree and look at the mango leaf, and I can identify it as a mango leaf because I know what that is supposed to look like. So if that leaf is disconnected from the tree and has no sense, oh, I'm a mango leaf, then you might start acting like some other kind of leaf, right? There's a story long time ago, just some of you may have heard this, of a traveler who stayed with a farmer and noticed a very different looking kind of bird pecking on the ground with a chicken. I'm not going to tell it in the full-blown version, but bottom line, it turns out that an eagle's egg had somehow gotten mixed in with the chicken eggs. And so the hen sat on it and it hatched the same way the chicken eggs hatched. And this eaglet was living like a chicken because that's all it saw, had no idea that it was an eagle. And it wasn't until the stranger came and was like, that is not a chicken. And the farmer's like, hey, acts like a chicken. Why am I bothering? But it took that eagle and took it up to the top of a mountain at sunrise, pointed it towards the sun, and then let it go. And this eagle figured out, wow, I have wings that would actually allow me to fly. I don't have to just do the little flights like that, like the chicken do. And so their stories help to remind us of who we are, and I think help us to fly.
Speaking of flying, what is the role of art in deliberation? You could bring Abbey Lincoln, Micere
Abbey
Mugo, Sylvia
Lincoln.
Winter, Julia de Burgos, and even Assata Shakur to an extent,
I think
because
we
she
can bring
then
all of them,
said,
even Nahanda, because even as
even,
we
yeah,
practice our spirituality, it's an art form as well, because we never separated. This whole idea of art for art's sake is a foreign concept to how indigenous people lived, right? You carve out a comb and you put symbols on it, not because you want it hanging in a museum for people to ooh and ah, but because it's an expression of who you are, even though there is a very practical function of that comb. This is just what we did, our homes and making designs on our homes and things of that nature. So I think art was always a part of who we are, a part of who I think all human beings are. And the
correctly.
extent to which we compartmentalize ourselves, or we now decide, oh, I'm not artistic, we actually stunt aspects of ourselves. So Abbey Lincoln would definitely say, in terms of art, that she saw her art as a tool of revolution. Whether it was her singing, whether it was her composing, whether it was her writing poetry, her art was life. And after her breakup
Max Roach.
with Max Roach, and she retreated, she really embraced her art. She started painting and things of that nature. But art is also healing, right? So now you find in certain medical facilities where they will have music therapy, they will have art therapy. Julia de Burgos would definitely say that her art was an expression of her life, expression of her strength.
Poetry.
Was her way, yes, her poetry. It was her way of questioning life and engaging with everything that life threw at her. She had multiple relationships, and she was fighting for the rights of people, but she was also fighting her own internal demons and alcoholism and so on and so forth. And not fitting in the way society would have wanted her to, because she could have stayed back home and married the right man, who they had identified for her, and lived that soft life, which is something I hear a lot now, people wanting to live the soft life. And I think Julia de Burgos would say, to hell with the soft life. My art is my form of living out loud. Right? Micere Mugo would probably say, art is how a people remember who they are. Art is how a people remember who they are. Think about it. Our music, our movement, our carvings, even the art of cooking. All of these things are an expression of who we are, right?
Yeah.
That creativity is not just about decoration, but it is about strategy. It's about memory, and it's definitely about survival. And we could go on with so many of them, because so many of these women were, actually all of these women were multifaceted, we know. And of course lived across times, but it's how they express themselves, even in how they dressed, right? They all had very different ways that they presented themselves, without trying to break my budget in recreating how they look. These women all had a sense of style, of who they were and how they showed up in the world. That in and of itself is artistic as well.
Okay, so we pivot to politics, which is something that impacts all of these women. Right?
Well, I don't think we're supposed to talk about politics. It's impolite to do that.
Whether it be in their personal lives or their interaction with the society in which they exist in. We start with, example would be Assata Shakur. Most people would escape into the United States as a place of sanctuary. She actually escaped out of the United States into a place that the United States is looking to constantly undermine. So that's one example.
Hatshepsut says, "Hey, Hatshepsut says she wants to say something on this, but go ahead, go ahead, finish your thought."
I say all of that in light of the fact that the clamor have often been for women to be in the role of authorities over their immediate environment and what have you. How would you say the case in a place like Tanzania at the moment inspires some sort of embrace of that idea? Take your time.
What I'm hearing from the Pharaoh Hatshepsut is that a starving and displaced people cannot defend themselves, and that the principal role of a leader is to create an environment in which the people of the land can thrive, not just some, but all. And what she worked very hard to do, and she did not wait to be given permission to become a ruler of the land. I'm not going to repeat her whole story, so you guys can go back and watch the story on Hatshepsut, although I will pull her book if I can find it. Thought I brought it out, maybe not. Oh, yeah, here it is. One of the books on her anyway. Hatshepsut, the female pharaoh, written by Joyce Tildesley. Let me see what I got going on here. Okay, so I think that what she would say is, in looking at what's happening in Tanzania, looking at what's happening in Sudan, looking at what's happening anywhere in the world where there's insecurity and instability and hunger and poverty, which is a significant part of the world, is that the leaders are failing their people. And that if you can't lead, then get out of the way and let somebody else lead. Don't just hold on to power for the sake of I have power. And so we see during her quote unquote reign, it was one of the most peaceful times for ancient Kemet. They were able to expand in terms of the trade that they did to the benefit of their people. And it did not it was not harmful to the people that they were trading with. Everybody benefited from it. She was able to create a lot more infrastructure within Kemet to the benefit of the people, even as she was building a lot of monuments as well to herself. But that was her way of telling her story. And thank God she told that story, because so much of what she did leave behind has been destroyed, but there is a lot left because she was very strategic about telling her story. I think Erland Johnson Sirleaf, looking at the Tanzania, again, I can add Sudan into it. We can add Cameroon into that equation right now. We could add Nigeria. Would say that stability comes when women are empowered to lead reconstruction and peace processes, but that women in those positions need to come in not just as I'm going to be more manly than a man, but really bringing the essence of who they are to their role as leader. But that there is a certain quality and a certain understanding that we have innately, we could argue. That doesn't mean that men cannot nurture those parts of themselves as well. But that when women come into roles and choose to leave out certain aspects of who they are and embrace just a sense of this is how a leader should look, which is the patriarchal model, then what we see are the same issues that we tend to get under male leaders. I think Micere Mugo would probably lend her voice to this, and she might look at it from the perspective of you've got to be willing to tell the truth and to name that problem. And so when we look at who is propping up these governments, and who's benefiting, are our leaders willing to be honest and to say, yeah, there's a problem here, to name that problem, understanding that it is truth, that healing comes through truth telling. So there was someone on the internet today that I saw who was making this observation, and I think this is going to be true for many, many African leaders. And I'm going to relate it to even leaders here in America as well, is that the majority of African leaders, their children are not educated in Africa. So you're president of a nation, you're president of a nation, but you don't believe in the educational system of your nation for your own child. So your children, even at the elementary level, are in a foreign country being educated. So you see many of them, their wives live out of the country and then they're governing, and it's like, that's crazy, right? What we see in the United States is you are governing over a system that has a public education system, but your children go to private school. And yet these public education systems, you and the other legislators, you get to make the policies that impact those schools. So if those schools are not good enough for your offspring, why not improve the schools so that they're good enough for everybody's children, not just that I can take mine out and put them in a select place. So Mbuya Nehanda would definitely say that if she were the president of Tanzania, that she would be trying to meet with the young people, meet with the disenfranchised, meet with the voiceless, not imprison those who disagree with her, to find out, to listen to them about their concerns and how they feel they're being harmed and what isn't serving them, and to ask them to join hands to create a nation where everybody can thrive. And that way to elicit their support. But it has to be that you are listening and you are responsive. And Mbuya Nehanda was listening to the cries of her people under the whip and the chains of these oppressors, and decided the time is now for us to rise up and fight back. And I suppose that when they interrogated her and tortured her before they finally killed her, that there were secrets that they were hoping she would expose and all of that, but she did not, because she was a leader first and foremost who was concerned about her people. And I think Mbuya Nehanda will furthermore say that true peace cannot come from those who profit from bloodshed. And so in Sudan, these leaders who are watching the blood of their own people flow through the streets, so much so that these satellites that apparently are spying on all of us all the way from Yale University can tell that there's been so much loss of life,
bloodshed,
so much bloodshed. Those people cannot be leaders anymore. And so even for here in the United States, think about how much blood we have shed domestically, but also internationally. Should those people, not those leaders under which it happened, not be removed from office. But then here's the issue. If you have a system, a structure that is so corrupt that whoever comes in it automatically has to abide by that system, or they get kicked out, look at Jimmy Carter, then are we, the populace, also not responsible? Do we also not have blood on our hands to the extent that we keep that system, those systems in place? So these are questions that we all have to grapple with and say, what can we do differently? And here's what I've come to really appreciate as I've studied all these women. We could characterize them as extraordinary women, but the truth of the matter, and for those of them that we have real pictures, because there's some of them where it's like, whose picture did you use? But these were ordinary human beings.
Yeah.
Who just were willing to do a little bit more, who were willing to risk a little bit more. Correct. Who were willing to do what? Like the extra. And so now we call them extraordinary. And that means that any one of us, male, female, whoever is listening or watching this, we too have the potential to leave legacies that inspire, just by doing a little bit more than what we may be doing right now, whatever your role might be. So we see these women all using different tools as they fought for liberation.
Midwife.
Biddy Mason, yes, she made her money from, being a midwife.
Being a midwife, yeah.
Mary Ellen Pleasant cooked and cleaned and served before she started investing in real estate and mines and laundries and things of that nature, right?
Yeah.
Mbuya Nahanda, it was her spiritual gifts in healing and taking care of her community. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf was great with money and accounting. And that's what initially took her to work for the IMF and so on and so forth. And those skills, we can argue, helped her to dig Liberia out of the very deep hole that they had been in as a result of decades of civil war and
Correct.
mismanagement, right? Shirley Chisholm, she used her voice, her passion, her tenacity, her problem solving skills. She started off as a teacher and she took that sense of what we need to be doing for our young people everywhere that she went, all the way to almost the White House, we could argue, right? We look at Julia de Burgos and it's like, I've got my pen and I've got my paper. And so we have poems from her from when she was literally dying,
Yeah.
still telling a story. And that was, it was probably the book of poems, or her book of poems, that allowed her sister to actually be able to identify which one was her. Right? And so every one of these women that we have looked at, Abbey Lincoln started as a child of, one of many. Father eventually left and mother is trying to make ends meet, and she barely finished high school, and it's like, hey, let's go see what we can do. But she was willing to learn and willing to explore. And when people like Thelonious Monk said, hey, you're a composer, she was like, oh, okay.
Really?
And then she went to work. So unless you try, you never really know what you are capable of doing. And so that's the other thing I get from these women is we can all be extraordinary. We just need to be willing to put a little extra on our ordinary.
Okay.
Wait a second. The Mexican president was groped by a man today. I had not heard that.
Oh, God.
Wow. I would
Yeah.
have to come back and to take a look at that. That is unfortunate that women
even in not protected by their states, even
not protected by the states. And we saw that with Assata Shakur and the way her body was abused by the system. The evidence shows that her hands were up when she was shot. And although she regained use of her arm, that was always a problem for her. Definitely for all of these women, understanding the importance of the autonomy of our bodies. And when you come to Mbuya Nahanda, how even till today, we're still fighting for her body. We're still fighting to find out where her remains are, and we want them returned to us so that we can properly bury her in. So our bodies, women's bodies have been so abused over centuries. Wherever there's war and strife, men might be killed. And I'm not saying men don't get and if anyone is listening, this might, let me say the trigger warning here, that men are not sexually assaulted or molested, but assaulting women has assaulting women has become a tool of imperialism, of oppression. Whether it's in Ukraine, you hear about the Russian soldiers and what they're doing to the women of Ukraine, or whether you're talking about Sudan, or whether you're talking about what Boko Haram did. The first major act of Boko Haram in Nigeria was to attack a school for girls and to cart off hundreds of young girls and to force them into sexual relationships with them. And some of those girls, young women, ended up having children for their captors. My sister actually is a trauma specialist, and she worked very closely with many of the Chibok girls, as they are known, who were able to escape or were rescued. And the level of trauma of what they experienced, above and beyond just my body was hit or I was made to work extra hard or whatever, it's that sexual abuse too. And so I think women having autonomy over our own bodies as well.
Okay. As we come to a close, I'm minded to ask all those women, from Mary Ellen Pleasant to Hatshepsut and Abbey Lincoln in between, Micere Mugo,
Sylvia
and
Winter.
Sylvia Winter, what would be their take on the times we currently live in? I say that to go back to the beginning, where people with means were effectively telling people without means that how dare you ask? And you know what? We're actually going to rig the system in such a way that to make it self-evident to you that, yes, we're in charge. How will these women have collectively resisted in their own little way?
Well, the fact that we're talking about them today, I think, demonstrates that they did it in more than in a little way. I just keep hearing Sylvia Winter talking about the importance of redefining our terms, redefining how we see things. Redefining what it means to be human. And that if we redefined humanity, it would automatically cause us to rise up and act in a different way. If we redefine what it means to be human, those of us who are not affected by, I know this is a largely American audience, who are not affected by the snap cuts directly, would still in solidarity be out saying, guess what? We're shutting the entire country down then. If you are going to cut off the means of livelihood for so many of us, or even one of us, we are going to be in solidarity. So coming back to Zorhan Mandani, something he said yesterday is, if you come for one of us, you have to go through all of us. And so for these women, looking at where we are right now, I think Hatshepsut would say, put your hands to the plow and build. That's what she did. She was very strategic politically. She surrounded herself with great advisors, and she looked for ways to help her community thrive, her nation thrive. She built. I think Biddy Mason will say, open up your hands and be more generous. We share. So if we say there are 40 million people who get SNAP benefits, and there are 350 million people in the United States, we're talking about what? 1 out of every 9 people is being affected right now. That does not include another set of millions who are furloughed right now. They're furloughed. They're not getting paid. So who are you sharing with right now? If you own property and you have people who are renting from you, are you having those conversations with them to find out what their situation is? Not from the perspective of people taking advantage of you, but from the perspective of sharing, like Biddy Mason did. Mary Ellen Pleasant will say, how are you funding our liberation? So we just had elections. Did you support any of the candidates financially? Because it takes resources to run. In what way are you supporting the current leaders who may be fighting for justice so that they know that they are not out here alone, even as they're being attacked? I think Micere would say, we teach and we remember the importance of knowing our stories and teaching those stories and creating welcoming environments. And so one of the things that people repeatedly said about Micere Mugo is how welcoming she was, how she always created a sense of home for people. And perhaps it's because she lived in foreign countries herself, having been exiled from her home, and understanding how much it meant to have the generosity and the warmth of other people. And so she extended that to other people. Abbey Lincoln would probably say, we sing ourselves free, right? Like, we don't stop living. We don't stop expressing. You know, I imagine that if what is happening now had happened when hip hop was first born, the kind of music that would be dropping now, similar to, you know, Sam Cooke and Marvin Gaye, you know, those songs that have endured, or even going back to Billie Holiday, someone we covered a long time ago, and then Nina Simone covering that song as well, Strange Fruit. We would see our artists responding in a very different way today. We will see our athletes, our entertainers responding in a very different way. Abbey Lincoln definitely used her voice for her time, for the time, right?
Correct.
Julia de Burgos will say, you better testify, you know, speak up. You know, I get calls from loved ones who are like, Aya, be quiet. Aya, like, don't be so, you know, you don't have to be the one talking. And I'm like, well, then who talks? Because if everyone is cowering, if everyone, I'm not saying that I'm not concerned. I mean, nobody wants to invite drama into their lives, at least I don't. But if you don't fight back, you're essentially surrendering. Of course, Shirley Chisholm will say we run, right? In this time.
Coming true.
This time, do you need to run for school board? So here in Texas, it's very disappointing to a large degree, the turnout, and also the propositions that were all to benefit wealthy people that our folk just voted for. All the propositions passed. None of them should have been a constitutional amendment. And now people are on my page saying I didn't know, or people needed to be better educated. And I was like, the education was out there, you just didn't seek it out. But some of the good news that came forth, though, is that in many communities, they were able to vote off their school boards, some of these Mothers for Liberty and some of these white nationalists. And they were able to put more progressive, if you want to, like that term, but people who care more about the humanity of all people, right? So Shirley Chisholm will say run. And the question is, if not you, then who? Like, what makes any of the people who are running for office? Listen, just heard about a 21-year-old who just won mayor somewhere in the South. He's a senior at Clark Atlanta University, and he ran for office. Like, Shirley would say we should run. Of course, Nahanda would say, you get knocked down, rise again. And that's exactly what she's doing. Sirleaf, so many times she could have truly left Liberia for good and lived a very comfortable life in the Western world. And I do appreciate her courage in going back to try and rebuild a war-torn country. And of course, Assata will say, whatever else you do, live. The very act of living is resistance itself.
In itself, yes.
And the fact that that woman, with all the millions of dollars and the resources that the United States of America mustered to capture her, to kill her, the fact that she lived till she was almost 80 years old and she lived free and died a free woman, what an act of resistance. So sometimes your greatest act is just that you lived. And actually, for many of us who would consider ourselves descendants of those who were enslaved, whether it's here in the US, in South America, of course, there were enslaved people who eventually ran to Canada. There were people who survived, obviously, the kidnapping on the continent itself and all of the wars that took place to harvest people to bring them over here. I would say that all of us today we are proof of their resistance, because the fact that we're alive today means that they lived. They found a way to live. Through it all, they lived. And we have that responsibility to live as well and to help others live too. And like Assata Shakur did, hey, if you can, even in chains, procreate. That was yet another form of resistance. And her daughter today is thriving. I believe will be putting together a celebration of her mother's life in New York next year. And as soon as I hear anything, I'll be sure to share it. But yes, lots of lessons from all of these women.
Yes. Thank you very much for that wonderful walkthrough.
Someone asked, what about our sister Billie Holiday? So what we've been doing is doing about anywhere from 11 to 13 women at a time. And then we come back and we just talk about that group of women. So Billie was the very first one we did. Yes. And we talked about her. But hey, if you have any questions or any particular comments you want to make about Billie, I'm here for it all the time, because Eleanor Fagan, which was her birth name, is an amazing woman. And she lives on in her music. Her influence is still abounds. In fact, I was just watching Jill Scott's video for her song Golden, and you see her on the bicycle with that flower in her hair, and I'm like, Billie Holiday. Yeah.
Okay. That said, as it's customary now, we will be looking at the lives and times of Beatrix Nascimentos next week. So the name is Beatrix Nascimentos of Brazil, the largest country in South America, and the one with the largest population of Black people outside of Nigeria. You guessed it. So, yes, as
looking forward to sharing that. All of these women are just amazing. Every week we're trying to figure out, okay, which one do we do this week? And it's like, okay, we're not dying tomorrow, so we're going to have time to get to all of them. But that there's so many amazing stories, amazing women that we just don't hear about in the way that we should. But I think I've said this here before, that we die. It is said that we die twice. One is when we physically, our spirit physically leaves our body, right? And the second is when people stop mentioning our names. And so you being here, us being here together and calling the names of these women. Amazing. I forgot to do this. So, because all the times we were talking about these women, so often I had the books and I never showed you guys. So let me do this really quickly. This is Writing and Speaking from the Heart of My Mind, selected essays and speeches by Micere Mugo. There she is. And again, if we hold up any books that have their pictures, you just see how varied we are in just the way we express ourselves. This is Julia de Burgos' Song of the Simple Truth, and it's a compilation of some of her poems. And you see that she could pass for quote unquote white.
She could pass for white. Yeah.
This book is called Soundtrack to a Movement, African American Islam, Jazz, and Black Internationalism. And there's quite a bit in it about our sister Abbey Lincoln. There is a full biography of Abbey Lincoln that is slated to come out next year. This is a book that Micere Mugo co-wrote with Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and this is the Trial of Dedan Kimathi. I have an older version of it that I could not put my hands on somewhere. Shirley Chisholm.
Unbought, Unbossed.
Unbought and Unbossed. I really love to read these women in their own voices. And so this is Shirley Chisholm in her own words, her speeches and writings. I didn't go into any detail this time, just tying the stories of all of these women and the men in their lives. But I gotta say, brothers, come on now. Y'all step up, step up. Okay. We love you, and then we appreciate when you love us back. This is Assata Shakur's autobiography. Check out that picture. I mean, are you guys paying attention to like how different our sisters show up? I mean, just amazing, right? Look at her, badass. Okay. This is another little book called The Tale of the Panther and the Dove. This actually also includes the story of one of our indigenous sisters, as well as Assata. And then this is Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. This Child Will Be Great. She has another book as well that I did not pull from the shelf. But there's a picture of her as a younger woman with this t-shirt, like right after she had been arrested, and she's got her hand up. And it's so reminiscent of Winnie Mandela as well.
When she came out,
Yes. Now, if you're going to talk about Black women and how we have shown up in the world, particularly African-American women, you absolutely have to get a copy of Paula Giddens' When and Where I Enter. This is the one I got in college, like 30 some years ago, but I have another copy somewhere that has a red cover. But this one, you name the woman of stature and she's in here somehow. So When and Where I Enter by Paula Giddens. The Making of Mammy Pleasant, which she would have just hated. A Black entrepreneur in 19th century San Francisco. And this is the picture that they say most looks like her, because there's another picture that's on some other books that they're saying is actually a Hawaiian prince, a Hawaiian queen. And then this book has stories of quite a few of the women that we've covered and that we will cover. It is African American women of the Old West. So the ones we've covered so far from this book are Biddy Mason and Mary Ellen Pleasant. But the sister that you see on the cover, that's Mary Fields, and we're going to get into that. And you were not going to mess with her, were you? So we are so amazing. We come tall, short, buxom, athletic, whatever, light skin, dark skin, woolly hair, whatever. So whatever you look like, however God made you, whatever your voice is, we all have a gift. We all have a tool that we should be using towards our liberation.
And yes, not to forget Sylvia Wynter.
Oh, yes. I didn't pull up. My bad. I didn't pull any of my
We must
Sylvia
learn
Winter. Yes, please
we
go
must learn
ahead.
to sit down together and talk about a little culture,
Yes.
decolonizing essays. So, yeah, that said, again, just to remind everyone, we'll be looking at Beatrix Nascimentos of Brazil next week. And so until next week, sister.
Until next week, like,
Share,
share,
subscribe,
leave comments, because the
download.
comments help to drive the algorithms. Like, seriously, the goal is for this channel to hit 2,000 subscribers.
By
You
the
all
end of
can make it
December.
happen by the end of December. We share a whole lot of other crazy stuff. If I may say so myself, this is great stuff, because I know I gain a lot just reading these books and reading about these women. And yeah. And then in my head, I have like dinner parties with them. Not dinner parties in like frou ways, but like I can actually like, hey, I'm dealing with this issue. How would so and so handle it? Like, give me your insights. So I know that this is beneficial. So please like, please share, please leave a comment, please subscribe. And tell as many people as possible to come and join and download the podcast as well.
True.
And thank you,
And
Adesoji, for always being the visionary that you are.
And as the women will say, living is the act of resistance. Yes, leave, leave, and leave. Until next week, it's good night and God bless.